Welcome to WagerTalk TV. I'm Kelly Stewart, joined by Bryan Leonard at Leonard Sports on Twitter, and Gianni the Greek at Greek_gambler. All right, guys, we're talking college championships. There are 32 conferences in college basketball. I focus on about 4 of them. I know it's almost impossible, or else you have no life, to focus on every single college basketball conference and teams. So my first question to both of you is, do you have a specialized set of conferences that you like to follow, or are you just looking for value across the board?
For myself, I don't know if I specialize in them, but I concentrate on the teams I know the best. The Mountain West. We live in Las Vegas.
Yes.
So I follow the Mountain West. I'm originally from Cleveland, so I follow the MAC, and people know that for college football. And I also follow the Big Ten, which is in that general area. But that said, when you're handicapping these tournaments, there's other tournaments going on at the same time. They have them all spaced out a little bit. So you have that ability to go into these other tournaments and handicap those tournaments a little bit more than what you would on a typical Saturday in college football for the regular season.
All right.
Personally, I don't really focus on particular conferences going into conference tournaments, but what I tend to do, what's been historically at least profitable for me, is the smaller conferences. I've had more confidence and willing to bet bigger because we have a time of the year where there's an influx of recreational bettors. You see it during playoffs, you see it during March Madness, you see it at different times in sports. And those smaller conferences, most people betting them, they haven't followed them throughout the season.
Well, I just made a joke prior to the video that
exactly.
I know what the MEAC is.
But can't name 5 teams?
Could I name 5 teams in it? Probably not, because it's not a conference that I typically follow.
But yet bettors are going to be lining up in line in every sports book because it's March Madness, and they're going to be betting these teams that they don't know anything about. And there tends to be a ton of value. And me working with sharp people who I trust, anytime they're getting down on these smaller conferences, I have more confidence than anything because, again, it's a lot of dead money being bet during this time of year.
All right, Bryan, any advice for our listeners on how to make some money during these conference championship weekends?
Yeah, he touched on one of them. He didn't get into the same part of it that I was going to talk about, which is great. But he's talking about the smaller conferences. In the smaller conferences, these players are out. There's only going to be one, for the most part, only one team from that conference is going to make the tournament. So you know when they're playing their preliminary games, they're in it to win it.
Are they? Because they need the win? Because sometimes I feel like what we see is these teams know they're probably going to be in the big dance, and all of a sudden they lose in the second round, and you're going, wait a minute.
That's the point I'm trying to get to.
Okay.
Now, you will find sometimes you'll find the team that is the best team. Well, Gonzaga, whatever. They're typical.
They're in the WAC, which is not a conference I typically follow.
Yeah, they're in it no matter what. But in a lot of the smaller conferences are that way. But some of them are just the championship of this. But you take a look at like the ACC, the Big Ten, Big 12. A lot of these teams are going to make it regardless. So that makes it a different handicap because, like back when North Carolina would win all the time, like a Duke, you can fade those teams in this tournament.
Yeah,
they could care less.
Yeah. So when they're playing a team that's not very good, you have to handicap that a little bit different, knowing that they don't need to win. In the smaller conferences, these teams are all, unless you were at Gonzaga or something, these teams are all in it. They've got to be able to make it to at least a championship game to have a chance.
So let's use Gonzaga as an example here. Going into the WAC conference championship set, I mean, Gonzaga has covered games they shouldn't have covered. San Francisco, that was a rough one. And a few times they've been on the ropes to some of these teams throughout the last month. Is a Gonzaga type team, a Kansas who's now leading the Big 12, because they don't matter, how does that affect your handicap through these conference championships?
Yeah, definitely has to be.
I mean, I guess my question is, you can't quantify it, but if you know that Gonzaga should only be a 14.5-point favorite to San Francisco, and they're now catching 17, which is what your number may be, at what point in time are we looking to fade these bigger names?
Yeah, Gonzaga's going to make it. They could be knocked out in the first
and it doesn't
round.
matter, they're still
playing.
But there's other teams in some of these smaller conferences that have dominated the conference. Akron's a team right now that's a very good team. If Akron doesn't make it to the championship of this conference, chances are they may not make the tournament. You have to look at every single team and every single conference and realize what their goals are going into this tournament. You're going to have your Kentucky's. Kentucky could lose in the first round. You could probably take 30 teams that can lose in the first round. It won't make a difference other than seeding.
Okay.
So you've got to take that into account.
So are you looking more for futures bets for like a longer shot team in some of these smaller conferences to make it, or, you know, like maybe a San Francisco to win the WAC, or maybe KU isn't going to do well, but we know Texas Tech still has their legs versus a Baylor or KU because those teams are at their max potential as far as value goes.
What I like to look for is I buy the Blue Ribbon yearbook every year. You read it early, and then you kind of forget it once your season starts.
Of course.
But you go back in like now and see who they picked to make it, and if those teams have not done well, you know they've got the talent. So you go back and you look and you say, okay, were there key players injured? Maybe somebody didn't make the grades. Then you can get in there and say, well, okay, this team, you know it has the talent, and for some reason or another they did not start off well. That's a team I might be wanting to look to back in this tournament, knowing that they can actually put it all together. And we've seen this many times. A team will, at the end of the year, will just put on, and then they go
They go on that run, that
they go on that run, and then all of a sudden they make it to the Sweet 16.
We saw it with South Carolina a few years ago.
Yep.
They got knocked out of the SEC tournament early, and then all of a sudden during March they went on that run, and it was really surprising to see. VR, your thoughts on how you handicap conference championship games, through their tournaments, and then what maybe are you looking for in terms of maybe a futures bet, or you kind of stay away from that market?
We say it's kind of cliche, but it's true that when you get to the postseason, it's a different animal. More times than not, you got to forget what you saw early in the season. And these teams have already played each other, not once, but twice in most cases. A lot of the betting line is going to be based off the result of those two games. The side and the total, you're going to see. Adjustments are going to be made based off those results. You're going to find a lot of value on that because of that, based on what happened in those games. Meaning, those teams Team A may have lost those two games during the season, but what was the situation with those two games? Were they coming off a big win? Or were they on a hot streak? Or was that just a bad spot? Because the postseason line is affected so much by the season line.
So once we see the seeding, maybe go through and start to
That's
circle.
where I think you take advantage of it. And I'm not saying teams that were 2-0 ATS or 2-0 over, now you're going to bet the conference tournament game under.
Of course.
But I think you should start there. That more times than not, the line's shaded towards that bias. Meaning if the total for their season games, let's say Team A versus Team B, in game one, the total is 120, they scored 150 points. In game two, the total got adjusted to 124, they scored 145 points. Now, come that postseason, that total may be 133, 134, 135. You may be looking at a 12, 13-point adjustment that truly isn't justified. It's simply based off a sample size of 2 games, not a sample size of a 20-game season. And that's where I think you really could take advantage come conference tournament, especially with all that recreational money that is just betting on perception more than actual data.
Okay.
Yeah, just a couple things I wanted to add. He talked about playing a team 2 or 3 times. You hear this all the time. It's so hard to beat a team 3 times in the same season.
Is it though?
If you've gone back and did the stats, no. If the team won the first 2, chances are they're going to win the next one because they're the better team.
It's like that in MMA and combat sports.
Yeah, and another thing is most of these teams will play on neutral courts. Like here in Vegas, they're playing. UNLV is the home team, but when UNLV is the home team, normally in a regular season game, 90% of the fans are UNLV fans.
Are they though? I've been to UNLV games.
They're fans of whoever they bet on. This is a different city. It was probably a bad example.
Yeah.
But when you play the tournament games, each team gets a certain amount of tickets for all these games. So especially in the first round, before anybody gets knocked out, the home advantage is lesser.
You're correct.
Minimal.
Like the Sprint Center in Kansas City, we always joke is such a great advantage for KU fans, but you're right. If KU is playing anybody outside of K-State that's not good, let's call them Oklahoma State, Iowa State, teams that are kind of having a down year in the Big 12, you're right. It's going to be all of the other teams' fans because they want to see their team get up for KU, where KU fans are going, well, we don't really need these tickets. We want to play Baylor in the championship game.
And then once people get knocked out, I've seen this many times. I've gone to tournament games, and once your team is knocked out, you sell your tickets.
Like a fire
Where are you going to sell them to? Then you sell them to the locals. So as the tournament goes on, the home court advantage is worth more for the local teams because there's going to be more local fans as the as you go to a different round.
Got it. Good stuff from both guys. $2 Tuesday every single Tuesday. You get the hottest handicappers best bet for just $2. That's at WagerTalk and our sister site, sportsmemo.com.